For those of you who are new to this channel, the Intermarium is a collective name for the countries of Central and Eastern Europe located between three seas: Baltic, Black and Adriatic. Historically, Intermarian countries evolved under the influence of similar forces, and today they represent one of the key growth regions of our planet, albeit the one that faces its own challenges, including some existential threats like demographics and wars. In our last video, we discussed how a hyper-connected megacity or a network city with dubbed Alpha Intermarium can play the role of a force that helps to concentrate the potential of the region and channels it into a supranational structure. A structure that is not in conflict with other existing structures like the European Union or borders and national interests in general. On the contrary, the one that benefits from them. But why do we need to unite the power of the Intermarium? For what purpose? The EU already shows how a political union is an extremely hard to achieve and some might argue a far-fetched idea that doesn't work equally for its members. An economic union, on the other hand, doesn't really require any centralization and can be achieved through a system of treaties. More importantly, an economic union is not really a fundamental idea at all, but rather a collection of policies. For example, the EU started from economic cooperation, and what is its fundamental idea today? What does it stand for? In essence, it is a rich boys club. Naturally, such a club starts crumbling every time any of its economies takes a downturn, which we all know is inevitable and cyclical. The most powerful glue that can transform the Intermarium into a lasting global force is when it has a higher purpose, a goal, a positive mission that can give it a distinct role in the context of the entire planet. Today, some Intermarian countries find their mission in the protection of Europe from violent Russian neo-imperialism. Other countries are in opposition to what they see as a quasi-imperialism of Brussels, and some even combine the two. However, being against something is a weak foundation for lasting growth. It is simply not good enough. You need to have an idea in which you stand for something, not against. Something tangible and forward-looking, not just rhetorical declarations or nostalgic sentiments. And if you take modern humanity and peel off most of its self-inflicted problems, the truly largest idea of them all is space. In fact, this is the only strategic idea worth pursuing. Everything else is pretty much noise and bug fixing, mere tactical tasks which cannot create a lasting foundation for progress. What are you talking about? Are you out of your mind, you might say? Space is a toy for the super rich, and we are just trying to make our ends meet and make sure our last workers do not run away to Germany. Well, maybe you are making your ends meet exactly because after joining the EU, you do not have any other strong purpose left. And nobody says that space is a quick project. Today, our politics confines us to 4 or 5-year-old cycles, but as British physicist Brian Cox mentioned, we forgot how to take on long-term projects.
We don't do that now. We don't think 100 years in the future. But if you go back when people were building cathedrals, people used to routinely start projects that would take 100 years to bear fruit. Yeah. And so we could imagine going there. And that then becomes fascinating, I think, because then you've got a solar system, another solar system that you could go and visit, conceivably.
It is exactly the lasting projects that give people stories. And stories create actions. And actions produce reality. But why do we think that space is such a fundamental idea? Here are 4 reasons formulated for you by 4 bright individuals. Let's go in the order of importance. The highest reason is best summarized by Professor Chris Mason. It is our moral obligation as intelligent species on a finite planet.
And I think this is not only sort of what is the natural next step of really human evolution and exploration, but I would even argue as our duty as a species, because we're the only species that has an awareness of extinction. So I think that gives us the responsibility to preserve not only our species, but actually all species.
The second reason is the preservation of the Earth, which in reality is impossible without space colonization.
Almost any metric you choose, we're better off than we used to be. And we get, antibiotics and all kinds of life-saving medical care and so on and so on. And there's one thing that is moving backwards, and it's the natural world. So it is a fact that 500 years ago, pre-industrial age, the natural world was pristine. It was incredible. And we have traded some of that pristine beauty for all of these other gifts that we have as an advanced society. And we can have both, but to do that, we have to go to space. And all of this, really, the most fundamental measure is energy usage per capita. And when you look at, you do want to continue to use more and more energy. It is going to make your life better in so many ways, but that's not compatible ultimately with living on a finite planet. And so we have to go out into the solar system. And really, you could argue about when you have to do that, but you can't credibly argue about whether you have to do that.
The next reason is the fundamental philosophy of human existence.
I think expansion is good, and I think we will expand, and I think we will expand outwards, because there's not much room left on this planet to expand. So I think we'll do. That's a whole different idea. It's not about gathering scientific information. It's about a frontier and all the benefits that come from operating as a civilization on a frontier, which we've sort of lost on the Earth because there is no frontier left.
And finally, as brilliantly summarized by Simon Whistler, money.
The first trillionaire there will ever be is the person who exploits the natural resources of asteroids, said Neil deGrasse Tyson. Asteroids could be big business. In fact, resource financial analysts like Noah Papanak have pointed out that a single asteroid, no more than 100 meters across, could contain between $25 and $50 billion worth of platinum alone. The asteroid 16 Psyche, first discovered by Italian astronomer Annibale de Gasparius in 1852 and targeted for a visit by NASA in cooperation with SpaceX in 2029, has been estimated to be worth in excess of 10,000 quadrillion US dollars. That's a 1 followed by 19 zeros. Asteroid miners today argue that the real gold rush in space is going to be for water. 5 liters of water in space is worth the same as a kilogram of gold on Earth. And there are other more important resources in asteroids too. They promise to be a plentiful source for the critical helium needed to make things like fiber optic cables and semiconductors, among many commercial and scientific applications. Helium is in increasingly short supply on Earth, with governments already being forced to ration it. Without helium, much of the technology that we rely on today, and which we will most definitely need to build a greener and more sustainable future, becomes impossible. Indeed, helium, along with water, will be the true source of the world's greatest wealth a century from now, and perhaps, if we make it, asteroid mining will play a critical role in that very future.
Countries of the Intermarium already missed a wave of colonization once, in the 17th century. Neither the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth nor the Austro-Hungarian Empire managed to participate in the overseas expansion when other European nations spread across the globe and built their wealth, which impacted them until nowadays. As a result of it, those two vanished. This hard-learned lesson should put space as a strategic priority for the Intermarian countries in the new age of upcoming expansion, especially while the current leaders of space exploration are still stuck with basically flying on bombs.
In order to send someone into space, we put humans on what is essentially a controlled bomb built by the lowest bidder. No, that's definitely dangerous. Had to think about it for a little bit, didn't you?
It is true. We cannot build a space civilization with the modern form of rocket-based launches. Even if the price becomes low enough, the frequency of launches required to bring millions of people into space and related payloads is simply unattainable with this technology. There is a whole range of non-rocket approaches currently under development. You can find some great videos about them in the description. But here's the thing. Many of them will benefit from or directly require a tall mountain, especially the furthest one from the center of the Earth. For example, the same technology that is used for the Hyperloop we discussed in a previous video can be used to launch cargo into space from the height of a 6,000 meters tall mountain. And if combined with a Skyhook, it can also launch humans. Let's put a pin in this thought. The recent headlines suggest that Europe is falling behind in the space race. But let's see how Eastern Europeans are represented in this already somewhat lagging effort. Among 11 active members of the European Astronaut Corps, not one is from Central Eastern Europe. Now, how about we also look at the former European astronauts? Well, again, French, Germans, Italians, Scandinavians, but no people from the Intermarium, which, by the way, has a larger population than France or Germany. There is, however, an exception. A Polish engineer, Sławomir Uznański, was recently upgraded from the reserve to a project astronaut. This is not to be confused with career astronauts, who are staff members of the European Space Agency trained for various long-term missions. But if everything goes well, his project-specific flight might get approved this year. However, the Intermarian presence in space is actually not that empty. First of all, Belarusian Marina Vasilevskaya and Slovak Ivan Bela went to space with the Russian Space Agency. Ukrainian Leonid Kadynyuk went together with the Americans. Now, Uznański prepares to go with the Europeans, and if he does, he will become the second Polish citizen in space after Miroslav Hermaszewski, who went into space in the Soviet times. And since we talk about the Soviet times, other Intermarians also used that route. Czech Vladimir Remek, then two Bulgarians, Georgy Ivanov and Alexander Alexandrov, Hungarian Bertalan Farkas, Romanian Dumitriu Pronariu, Belarusian Pyotr Klimuk and Vladimir Kovalonak, and a whole bunch of Ukrainians. Pavel Popovich was the 8th person in space, followed by Georgy Beregovoy, Georgy Shonin, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vitaly Zholobov, Vladimir Lyahov, Leonid Popov, Leonid Kizim, Igor Volk, Vladimir Vasutin, Alexander Volkov, Anatoly Levchenko, and Anatoly Artsebarsky. Hell, the famous father of the entire Soviet space program, Sergei Kovalov, was from Western Ukraine. This region gave rise to many people whose hearts were devoted to space. Even the pioneer of the Soviet astronautics, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, was of Polish origin. Now, he surely lived and worked in Russia, but you know who lived and worked in the Intermarium? Arguably the most important person for space science, Nicholas Copernicus, as well as many other famous astronomers and scientists who worked in the courts of Polish, Hungarian, and Bohemian kings, like famous astronomer Johannes Hevelius, who came from the Czech lands but worked in Poland, Lithuania, or the 17th century pioneer of multi-stage rockets, Kazimir Semenovich. And if you look at the fathers of the Soviet space science, interestingly enough, they're also from here. Besides Tsiolkovsky, Friedrich Zander was from Latvia, Yuri Kondratyuk was from Ukraine, and Erich Sternfeld was from Poland. Without these four in the bottom row, Soviet space science wouldn't be what it became, and definitely not that fast. So, the Intermarians always had this drive towards stars and contributed significantly to humanity's progress in space. But if you look at the number of applicants to the selection of European astronauts, the citizens of the Intermarium represent only 6.4%, which is 3 times less than the proportion of their population among the ESA countries. No wonder nobody gets selected. Look at the countries highlighted in red. Their combined population is bigger than that of France by 20% and almost equal to that of Germany. And then compare it with the number of French applicants. What happened? Like everything in Europe, the European space politics is complicated. There is not one, but 2 space agencies. The European Space Agency is headquartered in Paris and funded by contributions from individual countries, some of which are not part of the EU, like the United Kingdom, Switzerland, Norway, or Canada. The European Union Agency for the Space Program is headquartered in Prague, and unlike ESA, it is an actual body of the European Union, meaning it receives money not from individual states, but from the EU's budget. You see, the European Union appeared after ESA, and the idea was that ESA would eventually merge into the Union structures by 2014. Today is 2024, and ESA is still separate from the EU. The EU got tired of waiting and in 2021 created its own agency, EUSPA, which naturally got into tensions with ESA since, money. For now, the rift was mended. Out of 7 billion euros budget of ESA, 2 billion come from the Union. The rest is paid by the individual members. And you can notice the strong correlation between who pays and who flies. The contribution of the Intermarians is somewhere there. But the budget of ESA, even with the EUSPA's money, is dwarfed by its overseas cousin. The American NASA has a $25 billion budget, and unlike ESA that is focused on earning an extra euro by performing practical tasks in space for its clients, NASA's budget is predominantly focused on space research and space exploration. Today, we have a bunch of spaceports from Israel to New Zealand, but only 3 can launch humans into space: American, Russian, and Chinese. European, or should we say French, spaceport is in French Guiana. You likely already noticed that France pretty much calls the shots in the European space program. But it can only launch cargo. Yet its advantage is that it is near the equator. And the equator is the best place to launch spaceships because at the equator, Earth rotates the fastest. But there is one more advantage of the equator. Earth is not a sphere. It has a bulge at the equator. And the tallest mountain located on this bulge will have the furthest summit from Earth's center. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain from the sea level, but it is Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador, whose summit is more than 2 kilometers further from Earth's center than that of massive Everest. Remember what we talked about non-rocket launches and how they need a mountain? Well, the mountains on the equator will be the highly valuable access points to space in the age of space colonization, such as Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador, or Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, or Mount Wilhelm in Papua New Guinea. Locations like these are geographic phenomena that allow access from our planet to space at a massive scale. Think of the modern maritime routes and the role played by the Panama Canal or the Suez Canal, or especially the Strait of Malacca near Singapore, which accounts for 1/3 of the entire world's maritime trade. Whoever controls those mountains and develops non-rocket space access infrastructure on them will be the next Singapore of the space age and magnitude. Imagine providing most of the ongoing traffic between Earth and its space colonies on the Moon, Mars, asteroid mining missions, or space-based solar power companies. So, what are the tallest mountains from Earth's center? As you can see, Ecuador and Peru lead the pack. Ecuador would be the best place, followed by Peru, Tanzania, Colombia, and Bolivia. If you look at the chart of main peaks that compares their height against their distance from Earth's center, the famous Mount Everest is located over there. But we're interested in the top of this chart. Here is Mount Chimborazo. Other Ecuadorian peaks are concentrated in this area. Peruvian peaks are a little lower, then come Colombian. As for African peaks in Tanzania, Kenya, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, they are spread along this area. And the peaks of Papua New Guinea are lower still, although they do have the advantage of the ocean located to the east of them, the direction of space launches, which is always preferred. But the absolute best option of all of them is Mount Chimborazo, which is in Ecuador. But what does it all have to do with the Intermarium? Well, everything. Today, the Intermarium goes through unique transformations that combine 2 things: the strongest in Europe and one of the strongest in the world economic growth, and a massive existential war that produced a response to it. Historically, such a powerful mix results in a geopolitical supernova, which either creates a new leader or its energy is wasted scattering around its neighborhood. Today, as a response to new massive geopolitical challenges, Poland is producing perhaps the strongest army in the EU. Its recent shopping list alone overshadows any other EU nation. American tanks and helicopters, ridiculous hundreds of Korean tanks and howitzers, hundreds of HIMARS, hundreds of Patriot systems, 3 frigates, many dozens of Korean fighter jets, and most advanced F-35s. But with all this build-up, there is one army that is growing even bigger than the Polish, and it is the most battle-hardened army of Europe, the Ukrainian. Massive European and American help leads to the accumulation of American and German tanks, French and Slovak howitzers, lots of artillery, rocket launches, ballistic missiles, scores of fighting vehicles, and now also the upcoming fleets of F-16s and French Mirages. By the end of this war, Ukraine and Poland will be highly militarized, perhaps many times above their weight. Poland expanded its army to 200,000 people and hopes to grow to 300,000. This is how it compares to other Eastern European armies. Romania, over 70,000 active, 55,000 reserve. Over 40,000 in Hungary with 20,000 reserve. Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Croatia. Altogether, they make up another army size of Poland. However, nothing is compared to the absolutely massive 1.25 million of active duty personnel in Ukraine with 2.5 million of trained reserve. But what is the future of all this force? What will Poland do with all that military investment it made? What will Ukraine do with all these scores of best trained soldiers? What will the rest of the region do with its army buildup? Just sit on this dead weight until it expires? Or use these assets for something fundamental, something that can change the role of the Intermarium on the world stage for a long haul. For example, it can project its newly acquired power on one of the regions that have strategic importance for the space future of humanity. Today, Ecuador, Kenya, or Papua New Guinea are ripe with social instabilities that hold them back from leveraging their geographies for space access. Their economic development also leaves much to be desired. This is the recent economic progress of Poland compared to the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, and Kenya. Papua New Guinea is also at that level. And here is Ecuador. But here is one of the Ecuadorian neighbors, Panama. And the main historic investment that created the basis for the future growth of Panama was the Panama Canal, mostly made by the United States at the beginning of the 20th century. True, the deal between Panama and the United States around the creation of the canal did have the marks of colonial injustices that were typical for that period, followed by a complicated power play throughout the 20th century. However, the underlying strategic vision of Theodore Roosevelt, who pushed this project through, and all the investments, related services, and societal development did help to raise Panama above the rest of the region. The Intermarium does not have the geography for space access at a massive scale, but it doesn't mean it cannot build one elsewhere on our planet. Learning from how the United States used the unique geography of Panama, the Intermarium can find a way to create a new kind of mutually beneficial deal with, for example, Ecuador to develop a new type of space access infrastructure. On the one hand, Ecuador sits on a fantastic resource that it cannot develop by itself. On the other hand, the Intermarium can create a long-term space project, but it needs security for this strategic investment. Creating a strong Intermarian military base in Ecuador can help stabilize the country, open a new economy, while the space industry will drive education, businesses, and societal growth. At the same time, it will create a major unifying mission for the Intermarium that can be achieved through a joint effort of its countries. Support the evolution of focal points to channel this energy, like Alpha Intermarium, and leverage newly acquired Intermarian military strength for a strategic leap forward that will bring benefits for generations. If the Intermarium establishes its long-term goal to become a gatekeeper for humanity's massive access to space, the key logistics hub and driver for the space economy, the spear of humanity's colonization of the solar system, and eventually the creator of human outposts throughout the moons and planets of our immediate space neighborhood, then it will assume the true role of a leader on a planetary scale. Then it will provide the answer to the space colonization goals we discussed at the beginning of this video: saving the Earth, unleashing the frontier, creating new wealth, and championing complex life beyond our planet. Thank you for watching this video. If you like the Intermarium and space colonization, please press like, leave a comment, and subscribe this channel for more videos about the Intermarium.